Hey, tennis fans, you are listening to Watching Matchpoint Canada, Canada's premier tennis podcast. If you're following along on YouTube, hammer that like or subscribe button below. I'm Ben Lewis, and very happy to be joined by tennis analyst Abigail Johnson this week as we look back at the Madrid Open. And Abigail, I mean, let's start with I guess recency bias of the men's side and what we saw on Sunday. And I don't know about you, I'm kind of running out of superlatives to describe Jannik Sinner's tennis. Week in, week out, what we've seen the past two months has just been perfection, sublime. Another Masters 1000 title. It really is something pretty extraordinary.
Clutch, composed, absolutely crushing it. Ben, it's really been an insane run from Sinner, not just because he's winning titles, but because he's winning them in such quick succession at such a high level across countries, across conditions. He's navigated that transition from the hard courts onto the clay with barely a blip. I think it was really quite important for him to build the way he did across Indian Wells and Miami. He didn't come up against Carlos Alcaraz at those two tournaments. And as much as he's got a little bit more of a foothold in that head-to-head recently, Sinner, I do feel that he was really able to build the match confidence as he came through pretty comprehensively across much of those two tournaments. And so when he did actually come up against Alcaraz and Monte Carlo, he had that bedding, he had that footing, and was able to master some tricky conditions on those clay courts on that finals day, the better of the two. And it's just been continuous, the growth. We're seeing him adding to his game. He's becoming more and more confident with the drop shot, which he's brought into the equation. The serve. I actually remember, Ben, the last time I came on this podcast talking about marginal gains on the serve season by season. It's always going up by 1 or 2%. The first serves landed, the first serves won, a break point saved. When you're coming through in all those departments and you're of the level that Jannik Sinner is, that infuses into all areas of your game, and he is such a complete package right now.
He is so complete. You look at the finals, a 6-1, 6-2 thrashing of Alexander Zverev, which I know we didn't see the best version of Alexander Zverev in this match, but you mentioned kind of the clutch factor, calm and composed, and sort of how do we measure that? I mean, the measurables are there in terms of breakpoint statistics. You look at against Zverev, he converts 4-4. I look back to that quarterfinal match with this new phenomenal young Spanish talent, Rafael Jodar. Jodar getting number of looks, and it always feels like, and all the players are saying it as well, Jannik Sinner finds his very best level in these moments, and Jodar going 0 for 7 in breakpoint opportunities in that match, a 6-2, 7-6 win. Is it a mix of confidence, just complete and utter self-belief in what he's doing? He's so unflappable match after match, and he'll tell you, like, I get stressed like everybody else, but I gotta say, I really don't see it when I watch Jannik Sinner.
It all comes through, all the winning at any level, at any tournament. I mean, he looks a completely different player to the one that crashed out in 3, maybe iffy sets against Jakub Menchik in Doha in February. I think he went away and he actually... I'm not sure if this was after, but he kind of abandoned Winter Olympics commitments after the Australian Open or appearances that he was supposed to do. He got to work, and that did eventually come through for him. I think it's a combination for Sinner in terms of the rest of the fields. He's so clutch against these young guys. He takes them and their potential really seriously. We saw him out several days prior, actually courtside watching Rafa Jodar. He's very fresh on the scene prior to facing off with him in Madrid. He was set points down to Joao Fonseca in Indian Wells, won that match in 2 tie breaks. But he's really paying attention to these younger guys. He's shown his clutchness against them. Jodar lost 6-2, 7-6. He was going toe-to-toe with Sinner at the baseline and sometimes out-hitting him in that match. If you were coming after the fact and just looking at that scoreline, you wouldn't have an awareness of that because of when Sinner was able to impose himself and when he was able to sustain himself in that match to ultimately come through. We saw him lift his level at the back end of both sets against Fonseca as well. So it's really clutchness against the up-and-comers and confidence against the long-time top 20, top 10 opposition. You look at Alexander Zverev, he's on one of his favorite courts, if not his favorite court, I believe he said, in the world in Madrid. He's got 3 games against Sinner. That's a 9th consecutive loss to Sinner. That's 14 sets dropped in a row against Sinner. It's very hard to run away from that when you're Zverev and you walk out for that match and you drop serve straight away. And you could see him in his own head by the middle of that first set in conditions that across recent years have favored him as opposed to Sinner. Where do you go from there if you're Zverev? There's no recent confidence in the head-to-head to lean into. Yep. Medvedev's on the way back up, and yet he's lost most of his recent meetings with Sinner. I did put the number down, and actually I've lost my light here, so I'm going to have to check that. But 9 of the last 10 he's won against Daniil Medvedev. Yeah. Medvedev won the first 6 encounters in that rivalry, so he's really emphatically turns the corner and is just sustaining a higher level against these guys. When Zverev started out against Sinner, he might have been able to say that he had the better serve, would have backed himself to rally with him from the back of the court. I don't think you can look at any aspect of his game now and say that he's better than Sinner in that department, or even that he's equal to Sinner in those departments. Sinner's improving his serve season on season. He's more confident up the court. You can see Zverev, after he didn't hold his own at the beginning of that match, he shanked a couple of volleys that were easy put-away volleys for him in previous matches to go down quickly, the double break. And just the sheer weight of shots and velocity of shot that Sinner is able to sustain, it is up on most other guys that are currently at the top of the game. So it's clutch against the young guys and confident against the older guard.
Well, this is what Arthur Fils, for example, spoke about after Sinner beat him 6-2, 6-4 in the semis of this tournament. His weight of shot and the power that's coming through the court. He's just like he said, he wasn't receiving that level of power from anybody else on tour. Carlos Alcaraz is injured. We know we're not going to see him for the remainder of the clay court swing. We haven't seen Novak Djokovic play yet on clay courts. Now we should see him in Rome, but it does beg the question. I mean, we have kind of the quantifiable number of the gap in ranking points between Jannik Sinner and the rest of the field, and maybe it's a couple thousand up on Alcaraz, but a massive gap between Sinner and Zverev there from 1 and 3. How big does the gap feel right now between Sinner and the remainder of the tour, with Carlos Alcaraz on the sidelines?
Yeah, that's the key point, isn't it? Him and the remainder of the active players on the tour. My mum actually is a huge Carlos Alcaraz fan, and we had the TV on at the weekend, and she's like, "That's so quick to forget Alcaraz. He's barely been sidelined." But definitely, it's a completely different feel, right, when Alcaraz isn't there. And actually, I found myself wondering how different Sinner's schedule might have looked if he'd known that Alcaraz was going to be out for pretty much the whole of the clay season. That is a long time for him to sustain a level, and he's done so to date impeccably, transitioning from the hard courts onto the clay. But if you're going all the way in Monte Carlo and Madrid, 2-week event now, Rome, 2-week event, then you've got to do 2 weeks of best of 5-set tennis at Roland Garros. I've diverted a little bit, I think, Ben, from what you were saying, but he's entered Rome, of course. He's Italian and he's on a real hot streak. There's no reason not to play Rome. But if he goes all the way there, where does that leave him in Paris? We are talking about a guy who, as much of head and shoulders up as he is, he's never won a match that has lasted longer than 4 hours. And he is sensitive at times to extremes of conditions. And these two things are possibilities when you come to the Grand Slam stage. So with that taken into consideration, And with the gulf between himself and the rest of the active players that we've referenced, the younger guys and the top 20 at large noted, it does leave the door open for a certain guy by the name of Novak Djokovic, who turns 39 this month. And I think that he will be surprised to have a legitimate shot at this stage at the clay court major. I mean, we heard him say after he finished runner-up to Carlos Alcaraz in Australia that he had to be completely honest. As much as he maintained self-belief, he did not see himself getting back to a Grand Slam final. And yet with the younger guys lacking best of 5 set experience, that goes a long way. They're currently more of a challenge psychologically and maybe even physically to Sinner. Then you've got the top 20 guys to a degree, all of them struggling either for fitness or for versatility or for belief or a combination of 2 or 3 of those things. I think if you look at the depth of them, Djokovic has a CV and a history that could see him rise to the occasion when he comes to Paris. Going to be interesting. He's playing Rome. See how he goes in Rome. See if he can get himself to a physical state and a lack of rustiness where he will produce. But he's Novak Djokovic. He's all-time great. We've seen him beat the odds time and time again. He's going to head in Paris to the same court where he completed tennis and won Olympic gold. So I'm not sure how far I've steered, Ben, from your initial question, but it's quite incredible that we're heading into Roland Garros and it's Jannik Sinner streaking ahead, but it only takes one match for everything to change. And with Djokovic having only played one tournament since the Australian Open, he's a dangerous unknown.
He is a dangerous unknown, and I think back to maybe some commentary or takeaways of his past handful of majors where the feeling or belief from him is he doesn't have enough in the tank to beat both of those guys. Like, it was too tall in order to conceivably beat Alcaraz and Sinner back to back, and now we've removed one of them from the equation. So the door has opened slightly ajar for Novak, and I'm very curious to see how he looks in Rome, just to get a sense of his level. I want to talk a little bit about a couple other young guys. Alexander Blockx emerging to the semifinals of this tournament, and we said this on our last podcast. It's quite incredible the number of names we are now seeing that have played kind of that previous next-gen ATP finals event really properly breaking through. Like, I always expect it to take a little bit longer, and these guys are really promptly arriving, and Blockx with some big time impressive wins and getting to the semifinals. He's playing this week in Rome as well, of course, but he beat Felix Auger-Aliassime, which was notable kind of in the early stages of this tournament. Had a couple tough 3-setters early on, beats Casper Ruud. Maybe Casper didn't look his best, but Blockx seems to have a lot of game, a lot of potential, and we've sort of just scratched the surface of what he's capable of. I know you know him back from maybe Challenger days and what his abilities in his tennis.
I was very fortunate actually to be courtside in Melbourne when he won the Junior Australian Open. He beat Le Natien in that final. He'd beaten Fonseca en route to the final showdown. And that had him on my radar. Was very impressed. He edged that in I think it was a final set tiebreak where he got it done. But he then happened to play the ITFs in the UK at the back end of that season. I'd kind of kept an eye on him. And it was actually in the UK where he won his first professional titles. I had a viewing point on the balcony for that. What immediately stood out for me with Blockx was that he was already tall. He's listed at 6'3" now. He was already very tall at that age. We're going back 3 years now, and yet he moved incredibly well. Great balance at the back of the court. Great eye for the ball. Watched the ball and read the ball impeccably to the point where he was very rarely off balance. And was able to challenge opposition from all areas of the court. His offensive game actually wasn't up to the standard of the defensive at that point in time. But the feeling was, watching him, he has stature. He's in his teens. He's still growing into his body. If he has these fundamentals and these foundations nailed down and has already proven his ability to perform. He's won a junior Grand Slam. Surely he can only go up from here. He rode a real hot streak at the end of 2023. He won his first professional titles back-to-back, Challenger semi-final. And unless you really had an eye on the lower circuit, it might have passed you by, but he jumped in his first season on tour there almost 1,000 ranking spots from 1305 up to 350 in the world to start 2024. Something else that you would miss if you didn't have a firm eye on Alex Blockx is that he's had some very ill-timed injury hiccups. He's not had a huge injury that you'd look through his results and has set him out for a long length of time, but they've just kind of cropped up here and there. So he was riding that rocket at the back end of 2023, and then I believe it was an ankle injury that had him out from April to July of 2024. So that time in the previous year, he'd been playing 15Ks, very entrance level of the sport. That was a big time for building confidence and for gaining ranking points, and he missed that block, kind of struggled to find his footing a little bit after that. And then he'd have his moments, loves an indoor hard courts, really loved the European indoors, gives him that consistency to produce. I think 5 of his 6 pro titles have come indoors. And the one that didn't was Canberra 125 at the beginning of this season, outdoors. So that really showed him turning a corner. Rafael Jodar was his final opponent at that tournament, got the better of him. And I think for Blockx, it's just been hiccups that have stalled him from building true momentum and building confidence, because he can fluctuate in level, is what I have felt. His top level really promising, but he can go from being clutch one match to maybe a little bit wobbly in the next. Rolled his ankle US Open qualifying last year. I saw him the day off, so I think it was back spasms that he had to retire with in Australian Open qualies this year. But around that, next gen finals, final showdown, challenger runs, challenger titles, and it had him primed for when he got into a set of conditions in Madrid that were really suited to him. Serve has been improving, developing. He's tall, he's got the altitude there. Utilized it, more of an unknown opponent for some of these guys, and that ball just sits in your strike zone a little bit more in the altitude of Madrid when you're standing fairly tall, able to show his stability at the back of the court. I think that will have been an issue for Felix Auger-Aliassime. We know that he does play quite high risk, and he's up against a confident young opponent there. I mean, it does say a lot, Ben, when Casper Ruud, who's the defending champion, comes off court afterwards and says, on the day, I couldn't see the weaknesses in the opponent, which is what he said regarding Alexander Blockx. A run, really, that just ended in its simplest terms, probably with a more developed version of himself in Alexander Zverev. When I first saw Blockx, I drew similarities to Zverev in terms of so solid out of his backhand corner on the reach, maybe just having the defensive groundwork down and looking at needing to build a bit more offensively. But Zverev, I think that aided him, that he kind of knew where the targets were, and he was able to go in there with confidence, making that such a contrasting performance from his end compared to when he faced Sinner, a couple of days later. But massive for Blockx. He goes from top 70 essentially in the world to inside the top 40, and it just feels to me like that's just made up for some lost time as far as he's concerned, with those untimely interruptions that he's had over the last couple of seasons.
Yeah, he's a career high now, number 36. Jodar, career high, number 34. So these guys, you feel like they're going to be seated at the slams very, very soon. Thank you guys so much for watching us at Matchpoint Canada. If you like our work, follow along, hit the subscribe button below.